I want you to be selfish. Like what? Like literally. And the answer is a plethora of answers. It will get you better compensation, more advancement, better health, better wellness, more expanded opportunities. Like there is a personal case for DEI, which I don't think we've told because we focus on the business case for DEI. But I hope people take away is the importance of their personal journey. I don't care what your organization says. What do you say about why it matters to you?
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Leaders Podcast. On today's episode, I'm joined by one of the world's leading voices in DEI, the one and only Randal Pinkett, who's an entrepreneur, speaker, author, chairman, and CEO at BCT Partners. Today, we're going to be talking about his new book, Data-Driven DEI, which gives people and organizations the necessary tools and metrics to create lasting impact. During the episode, Randal shares the Data-Driven DEI 5-step process that offers a step-by-step guide and the tools and metrics that you need to measure, analyze, and improve diversity, equity, and inclusion. As always, before we jump into the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and follow on your favorite podcast platform. With that being said, let's jump in. Randal, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Chris. I'm excited to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Looking sharp as always. I said before we went live, I was like, whenever I see you, I feel underdressed. You got the pocket square, the tie. I'm gonna catch you slipping one day. One day I'm gonna catch you. I'm gonna be like, hey. You're like
people
Chris.
Who know me well. They joke that I do house cleaning in a 3-piece suit, and there's some truth to that.
I can imagine you with the Hoover, like in the suit. Like that's hilarious. Oh, important thing. Tell me some of those CDs behind you. Like what you got? What you got going on there?
Oh man!
What albums you got?
We got some vintage right there.
For people that can't see it, that's Michael Jackson Thriller album.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. We got some Public Enemy, some Whitney Houston. We got some classics back here. Nothing but classics.
These younger generation don't know about CDs.
No, they don't. That's Public Enemy.
Oh wow, you really got the originals. I love it. Like it's funny because like I feel like when Robin grows up, my daughter, she's not even gonna know what a CD is. She's gonna be like, what CD? What? Would you?
It's a relic. This is a relic.
But it's cool to keep it for nostalgia though, like to have it and put the sort of physical action of opening the case, putting in the CD. You know, like there's some nostalgia there. Even like some of the old albums I got like even like the books that would come in the CD case. They're like the booklets, you know, they would create in there with some artwork and stuff like that. People don't know. There was a lot of time put into those.
Exactly. It was part of the artistry.
Exactly.
The creativity, the packaging. Yeah. It's also a throwback to my very first entrepreneurial venture. I sold CDs out of my dormitory in college.
No way.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, on that point, tell everyone a little bit more about you personally and the sort of the journey to where we are now.
So I started a diversity, equity, and inclusion training company when I was 21.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, and tell me before that though, what inspired, what happened that you were like, okay, I'm starting this company? Take it even further back.
Yeah. So I was the kid who grew up selling candy at the school, selling lemonade in the neighborhood. I tried to sell my toys to other kids on my block.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And my mom found out and said, wait a second, I bought the toys. How are you selling the toys? She said, if you're going to sell the toys, give me a cut. And I said, Mom, you can't get a cut. She said, then guess what, son? I said, what, Mom? She said, your toy store is shut down. No more toys being sold. So I had this entrepreneurial spirit growing up. I get to college at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and a classmate and childhood friend named Wayne Abbott, who was 2 years ahead of me. He was a senior. I was a sophomore. He started a company selling T-shirts. And I'd never seen someone who looked like me, my age, running a business. And I reflected back on all those years growing up, selling candy, lemonade, toys, and said, if he can do it, why can't I do it? So I lined up my 3 roommates, Jeff Robinson, Dallas Grundy, Lawrence Hibbert. Well, 2 were classmates. One was my roommate. And I said, we should start a business just like Wayne. And they said, what are we going to do? I said, well, I love music. Let's sell compact discs. and we used the proceeds from selling those CDs to pay for us to do outreach to inner city youth to encourage them to go to college.
Oh, amazing.
So we were out speaking to these young Black and brown youth about going to college. And then we realized, Chris, that we could get paid for those presentations. And then that evolved.
Oh, wow. Okay. So that really is the journey and how that came.
Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. And then we got them, and then corporations were asking us to come and train their new hires
Oh my God.
on how they could navigate the world of corporate America. And then we trained their managers on how to mentor their new hires and their summer interns. And we didn't call it DEI, but at the end of the day, it was all about DEI. It was about how to teach these managers to manage diversity. And that's how we got into diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Crazy. So what were you actually studying, just out of curiosity?
So we were all engineers by training.
Okay.
Right? It was completely unexpected. And now my firm, BCT Partners, I should mention, just to end the story, the 4 of us who started at 21 and 20 are now 52 and 51. We've been together for 31 years.
Wow.
In 31 years. And not only are we still together, Chris, we still get along.
Oh, man, I know about that. Trust me, my co-founders are my best friend. I know about the hard times. Because we said that in a recent episode we did. Like, that's we did a podcast together, kind of just celebrating the studio. And we had a question to each other, like, what you're most proud of? And both of our answers was that we're still friends.
Yes,
you know,
that's right.
Forget about the money, forget about the success. It was
right.
like, that's what I'm most proud of, is that we're still friends to this day. But I love that, man. That story is amazing.
I share that sentiment. I mean, it's like a family-owned business among 4 brothers.
Yeah.
And we've married our technology, engineering, data science backgrounds with diversity, equity, and inclusion at our firm, BCT Partners. In other words, what differentiates us, among other things, is this combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, virtual reality, information technology, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's a rare combination you find
100%. And is what's most needed right now in the DEI space. And that kind of leads us to the book behind you, right? Data-Driven DEI. This all makes sense now with what you studied. Now I'm glad I asked this question, because it's all come together now. It makes sense. So yeah, the new book, Data-Driven DEI. I'm sure. How long was that in the works? I'm sure it was in the works for a while.
No. It is the culmination in many ways of the work we've been doing. And I'll read you from the dedication, because it says, Data-Driven DEI is a direct result of the mission and vision we set out to accomplish when we began our social entrepreneurship journey more than 3 decades ago. Wow. Like it's dedicated to our president, Lawrence Hibbert, who was assigned as my little brother when we were in college, randomly assigned as my little brother. And Dallas was randomly assigned as Jeffrey's little brother. You had 2 big brothers mentoring 2 younger brothers who came and then started the business, selling CDs, doing DEI, and now 30 years later, we're together. So it's been 30 years in the making, arguably, but the writing took me 2 years in the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I produced a video on YouTube called The 7 Myths of Racial Equity. And a acquisitions editor, Mike Campbell at Wiley, reached out and said, would you consider writing a book about that topic? He later learned about my background and our work at BCT and said, wait, you guys are doing data science and DEI, technology and belonging? And he said, I got a better idea. I said, what's the idea, Mike? He said, I think you should do Data-Driven DEI. And that same day, I went online to get the domain, datadrivendei.com.
For everyone listening, datadrivendei.com, which I couldn't believe you even got. You know, sometimes, like, I'm not a religious person, but I do believe in the universe. Like, what you put out there comes back to you. And I feel like everything you just said just feels like it was meant to be. Him seeing that post, him reaching out to you, the mentorship, your background in engineering, merging with DEI. You can't make this stuff up. As well. And I'm so happy that you're literally living your purpose.
I appreciate that.
In every shape of it.
No doubt about it. There's a great lyric in a song from the Broadway play Hamilton. And if you know Hamilton's story, he connects with this hodgepodge of others who transformed the trajectory of America. But there's a lyric that says, what are the odds the gods would put us all in one spot? And I think that's a testament to our story. I mean, what are the odds the gods would put 4 Black men together in engineering to start a DEI company?
Yeah, it doesn't exactly. And back then, you wouldn't even have been able to foresee where DEI is now, and the way it's gone through its own digital transformation. So you couldn't even have, you didn't even know that we'd be where we are now, right? Where I'm speaking to DEI and HR leaders every day, talking about how do we measure DEI? What does success look like, right? And it's in its infancy in many ways. So that's why when we first spoke, I was like, this is so timely that you brought this book out, because it's kind of what I'm hearing from everyone right now as well. Where do you want to start, man? Where do you want to jump off? Because there's so much to get into.
Well, I'll start here, and you'll appreciate this, Chris. One of the opening messages in the book is the following: organizations don't change, people change. And so while the book might be perceived as targeted to those who lead DEI for their organizations, chief diversity officers, DEI managers, champions, leaders, HR professionals, that's the secondary audience for the book. The primary audience is anyone who wants to use data to drive their personal journey for diverse relationships, inclusive behavior, and equitable practices. That's the primary audience. That was the other gift Mike gave me. He said, I challenge you to not just target DEI leaders, HR leaders, but to target people who want to embrace these principles. And that means it's really 2 books in one. It's a personal track and an organizational track.
Love that. I think that's so important. And I say that about HR as well, because this isn't an HR issue or a DEI issue. This is an everyone.
That's right.
As well. So I'm glad that you did that and had that lens, and I'm glad that you made that distinction. I love the fact that you kind of broke this down into the 5-step process in the book. So let's kind of delve into the first one and talk about DEI inventory. Can we start there? Could you start us off there, and then we can go through?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's a step 0.
Okay, step 0.
Okay. It leads right into step 1.
Okay, great.
Step 0 is DEI incentives. What's your motivation for pursuing DEI, caring about DEI? What are your values on this topic? What's the self-reflection and introspection you can do to clarify why this journey is important to you intrinsically, meaning it's a part of who you are, or extrinsically, it's in your performance evaluation, it's in your bonus structure, who knows? But that leads you into step 1, DEI inventory. And listeners will...
Why is that first part so important? Before you get into step 1, why is that first part so important?
Because if you don't take the time to clarify why it matters, it will not sustain itself for any person or for any organization. And it is that process and the product of clarification, meaning asking the deeper questions and then capturing on paper the value, your DEI values, your DEI mission, and your DEI vision. And in the book, you will find my personal DEI mission and vision that I've clarified from my own journey. And the reason why it's step 0, perhaps obviously now, is because you may or may not revisit that step, but it has to happen at least once to enter into the cycle that we're about to discuss.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I feel like that's the part that companies make a mistake. They don't even know why. And I feel like if you don't start there, then you don't know where you're going and where, So I just wanted to, that's why I wanted you to clarify.
If you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there.
Well, or you can't hit a target you can't see.
That's right. Well said.
Well. All right. So step 1.
Step 1, and listeners will notice the alliteration on the letter I, DEI incentives. Next, DEI inventory, and that is performing an assessment. To know where you're going, you got to know where you are. So you have to conduct, for people, you have to assess your preferences and your competences. Preferences, the things that you're naturally inclined to do. It's neither good nor bad. It is what it is. But a preference can lead to a blind spot. If I prefer to hang around men, then I might overlook a woman for a leadership position. And my competences is a value judgment, the things that you do well or you don't do well. Are you good at managing people who are different than you? Do you demonstrate inclusive behaviors? Are you an inclusive leader and you embrace the competences of what it means to be an inclusive leader? Those are competences. For organizations, it's the 4 Ps. You got to assess your people, you got to assess your policies, you got to assess your practices, you got to benchmark your performance. I keep it simple, Chris. So for people, it's preferences and competences. For organizations, it's the 4 Ps: people, process, practice, performance. And that's your DEI inventory to get a baseline and a profile of where you are.
How does that work typically? What's the most effective way? Do you have someone come in to do that for you? Do you do it yourself? How does that work?
Good question. So, with my background as what we'll say a former academic, I did my doctoral work at MIT. This book has extensive research on tools that you can use to assess your preferences and competences, and tools that you can use to assess your people, practices, policies, and performance. Now, I would advise any organization to bring in a professional who administers these tools. But if you have a competent team that can administer surveys and administer interviews and focus groups, you might consider it. But at the end of the day, it's almost always best for a third party in the DEI context, because they'll be seen as a neutral, trusted third party. That if it's done internally, it can take you down a very slippery slope of looking like it's self-serving, concerns about privacy, confidentiality, anonymity, the list goes on. So I encourage organizations to consider a professional organization to come in and do that assessment. And for people, I think you can do it yourself. I think it can be DIY.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that. Is that something that you help companies with?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, kind of woven into the book is how we do it at BCT. And then, so I lay out the broad strategy of how you accomplish these things. And then I give you a specific example of how we do it at BCT.
Great. What would you say are the biggest mistakes that you often see companies make?
Not disclosing the findings broadly. Hands down.
Being transparent. Being transparent.
Yeah. And let me talk to your HR folks right now, Chris. Let me talk to them directly. HR professionals can often be the worst enemy of DEI, because part of the tradition of HR is protecting against risk and protecting against HR liability, which runs counter to this notion of transparency and disclosing the results of a DEI assessment, which means we have to share the data. We have to distribute the data. We have to be honest about the data. I think about it like truth and reconciliation. If you want to reconcile with your employees for a DEI path forward, you have to give them the truth. So to the HR leaders listening, I say to you, we have to strike a healthy balance of scales between legal liability on one side of the scale and truth and transparency on the other side of the scale if we want to give fidelity to a DEI journey.
I love that point. And I think everyone listening can relate to that point. But you're the first person I've heard. You're impartial, so you can say that out loud. so it's great to hear someone say it. What can HR do then to better support DEI then, while we're on this topic?
I think it's pushing the envelope on balancing the very scales that I described, and to the extent that we as HR professionals can be a partner in that transparency across the HR lifecycle is critical, meaning recruitment, development, advancement, and support. And retention. Let me add retention there: recruitment, development, advancement, retention, and support. And I think about it very simply. If we can give clarity to in, up, and out, who's coming in, who's moving up, and who's going out, and stratifying and disaggregating that data by demographics, by location, by tenure, by level in the organization. If we can disaggregate that from an HR perspective, that is significant fuel to the DEI fire to then strategize on how to address where we have inequities, where we have gaps, where we have disparities, and et cetera. So to me, getting those insights and again, being transparent about them, which is not necessarily the tradition of HR, that gives DEI the partnership they need to do their work.
Love that. In, up, and out. I love that.
Yeah.
So the second step, number 2, DEI imperatives. Break that down for us.
Yeah. So DEI imperatives is now asking the question, where do we want to go? What do we want to do? And I am a big fan of a strategic planning model called OGSM. Objectives, goals, strategies, and measures. Let me deal with just the OG for right now. Did I say OG? Let me deal with the OG.
I'm about to say, it already sounds good already. I feel like you just chose it because it said OG and you get to say OG.
That's right.
I think that's secretly why you chose it. Go on.
That might be why I'm drawn to it, especially for a guy who was carrying Public Enemy around a moment ago.
I was about to say, yeah, there's a link.
So OG is objectives and goals, and OGSM goes qualitative, quantitative, qualitative, quantitative. So the objective is a qualitative articulation of what you want to accomplish. For a person, I want to be a more inclusive leader. For an organization, we want to create a more inclusive culture where people feel like they belong. Mm-hmm. That's a simple statement, but the G is to put a quantifiable goal, G, the goal against the objective. So for me, I may say I'm going to take the intrinsic inclusion inventory, the I3, and I want to level from level 3 to level 4 on the I3. That's my goal. I can measure that. I go from level 3 to level 4. For an organization, I'm going to do a culture and climate survey. I'm going to produce an index for every department and across the organization. Let's say our index ends up at a 6 out of 10. Well, then my goal is to go from a 6 to a 7 in the next 12 months. That's my measurable goal against my objective. And that's DEI imperatives, objectives and goals, the OG.
How do a lot of times the companies struggle with, like, how do they know where to start, what to choose? You know, because there's so many, they get into this position where there's so many things. Like, where do I start? What do I do? What is most important? What advice would you give them when it comes to that?
Great question. And that's why step 1 is so important.
That's true. Yeah. Otherwise, you're like, yeah, go. Sorry, go. Yeah.
No, you got it. You got it, Chris. Because if you skip over step 1, which many of our clients want to rush to the objectives and goals, well, a good assessment will tell you where you're doing well and where you're doing your worst. And there you want to focus your objectives and goals. So if, for example, I've got Black women showing up as the highest with experiencing microaggressions, then I have to consider my objectives and goals must be centered on improving that lived experience. If I'm underrepresented with women at the executive levels, I've got all white men in my leadership team, then I have to consider one of my objectives and goals have to be to increase the number of women represented at the executive levels. Like the DEI inventory directly feeds into the DEI imperatives.
Mm-hmm. Love that. What you mentioned earlier about some of these initiatives not coming off as self-serving, or it's something that's being done to the employees. What advice would you give in terms of how, once you've decided, okay, these are imperatives, what's the best way to communicate those to the organization?
Yeah, I read an article recently in the Harvard Business Review, and it was entitled "What Has and Has Not Changed with Being a Chief Diversity Officer." And I'm going to tie step 1 to step 5. We'll come back to this when we get to step 5, which is DEI impact. They said that after George Floyd's murder, many chief diversity officers were arguing the business case for DEI. What the research says, what the numbers say, what the data suggests. But 2 years later, in 2022, they've shifted the strategy to telling their stories, sharing their values. And so to your question, how do you roll this out? I say to leaders, tell your story, share your values, because what they found is it is more inviting and more inspiring. There's two more I's. It's more inviting and more inspiring for people to see a reflection of the journey within you. And that's not to ignore the business case. I'm not casting that aside.
Yeah.
But I'm saying that there's something there about people connecting into our experiences that invites them into the journey and inspires them for their own journey that I think is very powerful as we think about rolling it out. So we can share the findings from the assessment. Where are we underrepresented and who's not experiencing our culture? But let me tell you about my story.
Yeah.
Let me tell you how I grew up. Let me tell you what I've learned from working with all of you in this organization. Like that to me is how we roll it out.
Yeah. And that's how you capture people's minds and hearts, right? It's just seeing a number on a spreadsheet or a slide deck doesn't invoke emotion, right?
That's right.
When you hear someone's story, that's what really captures people's imaginations.
Exactly.
And that will never change. To your point of what has and hasn't changed. Story, no matter, I speak to a lot of people analytics leaders, and one of the biggest insights that always comes from that, they're like, Chris, it's about all of the technical knowledge, all the thing, storytelling. That's the one skill that many of them lack because they're very analytical. So they say, Chris, the biggest thing I've had to develop as a people analytics leader is storytelling. How do I communicate that message? No one wants to see a 50-page slide deck of data, right? It's a story. What does that mean?
That's right.
Love that. Where are we? DEI insights. So understanding what strategies have worked in other contexts. Give me an example.
Yeah, well, this is one of my favorite steps, DEI insights, because what it says is before you decide what you're going to do, which again, folks rush to say, well, what are we going to do? Before you get to what you're going to do, look to see what's worked for somebody else or for some other organization. So for example, we've rolled out virtual reality. We have a whole series of immersions called Through My Eyes. For years, we've been talking in DEI and HR about people seeing the world through somebody else's eyes. Well, virtual reality gives you the opportunity to do exactly that. So you would want to research the likes of virtual reality as a potential tool that's worked for others that might work for you. We know employee resource groups have worked for others. It might work for you. We know tying compensation to the objectives and goals that you've established has worked for others. It might work for you. Let's say it more simply. Don't reinvent the wheel. If somebody has a wheel that's working, well, then let's look at their wheel and maybe we should adopt it. So DEI Insights says pause for the cause, look to see what's worked for other people and organizations, and then to step 4, now let's decide what we're going to do.
Love that. Pause for the cause. love that one. How do, on that point though, it's not just because it worked for someone else doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work for your company. How do you decide and understand whether it would work in your context? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I often say that best practices, proven practices, promising practices should inform what you do, but not define what you do. So you have to then go back to your assessment, understand your culture, understand your climate, understand what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. And then you got to make some judgment calls of what we're going. And I think of this cycle as a series of experiments, meaning you don't have to necessarily, I'd rather that you do something than to continue analyzing
and do nothing.
Do nothing.
Paralyze.
Exactly.
Analysis paralysis.
Analysis paralysis. Yes.
Yeah.
So roll something out, and then let's learn and see what worked and what didn't work. So all that to say, do the homework and do the due diligence, but then make the call for what we're going to attempt to do for our organization, and then let's see what works and what doesn't work for us.
So you could grab like the what was the immersive VR experience? What do you call it again? You said it.
Through My Eyes.
Through My Eyes. Love that. So you could choose a small population of leaders in your business, right? Roll that out.
That's right.
Touch upon that a little bit. I've heard a lot about this. I spoke to a couple of leaders that have implemented this, and they said it's been groundbreaking for them. Yeah. Could you share some stories around that? Because I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and I would encourage your listeners, if you go to datadrivendei.com, I have inventoried several promising and proven practices for people and for organizations. Said differently, Chris, the publisher said that's too much content. Get it out of the book. It's too long. So I put it on the website. But I have research on the website on what we've learned about the power of virtual reality. Higher retention rates, people experiencing what's called neuromotor syncing, which is you begin to feel what the person felt in the virtual environment, mitigating bias with sustained mitigation from virtual reality experiences. And so we have a library of experience. We have a immersion where you're in a budget meeting. I know that sounds exciting, a budget meeting, but you're in a budget meeting and you're seeing microaggressions fly around the room, and you're the recipient of the microaggressions. We have an immersion with a pregnant Black woman going into the hospital to meet with her doctor and the nurse, and experiencing bias in how she's not being heard, they're not being responsive to her needs. And we can put you in their shoes to see that scene literally through their eyes. You don't see yourself, you see your hands if you look down, you see your lap, and you see the other characters in the immersion. And it has proven to be enormously effective for us. We have one other solution called the inclusion habit. It's like Noom for inclusive behaviors. Noom will coach you to nutrition. The inclusion habit will coach you to inclusive behaviors. It gives you daily micro commitments that you can embrace, simple things to do that research has shown leads to more inclusive behaviors. We have a plethora of examples just like that.
Yeah. I feel like it's like taking the storytelling to the next level, because you can do things like unconscious bias training, which some companies have had success, some are skeptical, but then being in that person's shoes, seeing through their eyes, right? And the feeling, that doesn't leave you, right? If you think about memories in life or times in your life which you can remember vividly, it's because you had a feeling connected to that moment, if that makes sense. And that's like ingrained in you. So that's where I think VR is. It's so fascinating. And I was going to ask you about some examples, but you gave some amazing examples of what that looks like as well. So fascinating. And how obviously it's VR, but like when you go into companies, obviously, there's only so many VR headsets you can have, but how do you scale that in companies?
You're going to love this, Chris. You're going to love this. We pivoted in the pandemic. Before COVID-19, we were doing full-blown headsets. In COVID, we re-engineered the solution where we can deploy it to your mobile phone.
Nice.
You can experience it on your phone in 360 degrees. All you have to do is move the phone to look up, look down, look left.
Use the gyroscopes in the phone.
Yes.
Why am I not surprised? So now it's scalable. That's the point. So, a lot of these things are great. It's like, oh, that's fantastic, but how do you scale it? Well, there you go. And even with the phone, you can buy like cardboard headsets that your phone mounts into.
That's right.
And you can do that as well. So it isn't really, it is cost effective to do that. So companies thinking, oh, we can't do VR. You can. You can. You can. And you can scale it too. I'm glad they asked that, because I think many people would have heard this right now and said, we can't do that. As well. All right. Where did we leave off? Number 5? DEI. DEI initiatives.
Yep. DEI initiatives. Yep. So step 3, insights, leads right into step 4. And now we go from the OG to the SM. So the S is qualitative. The M is quantitative. S is strategies. What are you going to do? And again, in the book, there's a laundry list of things you can do for people. Books you can read, articles, videos, podcasts like HR leaders. There's movies you could decide to go to, travel that you could undertake. I mean, the list is endless. And for organizations, again, strategies to pursue, employee resource groups, organization-wide training, inclusive leadership for all managers, DEI courageous conversations to build the muscle of having difficult dialogues. I mean, so you decide what you're going to do. That's your strategy. And then your measure is how you gauge progress. And let me differentiate between outcomes and outputs. An outcome is what you ultimately hope to accomplish. Better culture, inclusive behaviors. The output is a stepping stone to get to the outcome. So an output is, I read the book, I completed the training, I created the ERG, and I've got 500 people in the ERG. These are all outputs. They're not final outcomes, but they are intermediate stepping stones to get to them. So when we talk about the OG, objectives and goals, we're talking about outcomes. When we talk about the SM, strategies and measures, we're talking about outputs, progress measures, trainings, conversations, events, activities. That's DEI initiatives.
So when creating these initiatives, do you start with what is the outcome we want and then work backwards?
Exactly, because step 2 was, what do we want to accomplish?
Yeah, so you're working from that. So you can it's great to keep you on track, right? It's like, this is all well and good, everyone, but is this getting us there?
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right. The objectives and goals are your North Star.
Yeah.
Strategies and measures are the path to get you there.
Yeah. I can see how companies would veer off without realizing.
Right. The objectives and goals really keep us anchored with what are we really trying to do. Strategies and measures are simply tactics. And in some ways, those are the experiments. Let's try ERGs.
Yeah,
let's
try everything right. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I love that.
There you go.
I wasn't expecting to ask you this, but it just kind of popped in my mind because I had a conversation about half an hour about this with a chief diversity officer saying, Chris, they've got their North Star, they know their outputs and outcomes, but right now, during all of the tech layoffs and everything, budgets are being cut, and DEI seems to be one of the areas that's being affected the most. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on maybe what advice you would give, and I'm sure you're hearing this from some of your clients right now, and it's tough and it's really disheartening because I feel like now is the time we should be doubling down.
Yeah,
this is the most important time to be doing this. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say to those experiencing budget cuts or layoffs or downsizing or right sizing, keep your eyes on the prize. And by that, I mean the following. Windows of opportunity open and then they close. And there's cycles for every organization, every industry, every market. What you're ultimately trying to do within the windows that open is to change policy in ways that are lasting. In other words, if we can implement diverse interview slates as a policy, that's lasting. If we can introduce diverse interview panels as a policy, that's lasting. If we can put in place tying compensation to goals and objectives, that's lasting. Said differently, if we can get that done, the only way it will change, somebody has to undo it. So programs are nice. I'm not going to bemoan programs, but programs can come and go. They get slashed with budgets. I put in a leadership development program, it gets cut, it goes away. But if I change the policy, that doesn't cost me anything once it's in place, meaning I don't have to slash the policy. I'm tying compensation to goals. That's how we do business. It's now ubiquitous. So keep your eyes on the prize for what are the institutional changes that will last and not the programmatic ones that can be cut.
Oh man, I love that so much. Because when I'm having those conversations, it is about the programs being cut, to your point. Whereas if you're, as you said, if you've already assigned executive to a conversation to DEI, then that's a lasting policy that's going to be there, whether the budget goes or not, as well, right? Or pay parity, for example, right? Having that as a policy, that's probably another example, right? That's going to be there as well. So yeah, you kind of got to look at it through a different lens.
That's right.
In that sense, I didn't even think about that. So then if you are in that position now, you've got to think about what do I double down on that's really going to be lasting.
Exactly.
As well.
Exactly.
Love that, man. Love that. We're on the last one, right? DEI impact.
Yeah. So you'll appreciate this because you already queued it up earlier. DEI impact, on one hand, is about the data. Where do we make progress on our outputs? Where have we had impact on our outcomes?
Mm-hmm.
Where have we enjoyed success and where have we perhaps been stalled? But the second part is where you went earlier. It's also about DEI storytelling. And I have an entire section here on the data, scorecards, dashboards, reporting, like that's there. But I have an entire section on how do you tell the story? Who are the characters? What's the plot? What's the call to action?
Yeah.
You know, and it's uplifting the personal experiences people have had, you know, like I was a part of a lunch and learn with colleagues, and I learned about one of my colleagues who came from India. And after that, like we hung out outside of work and they taught me how to cook a dish from India. And now I know how to make this wonderful, exquisite food. And I'm a better person because of it. And I'm a better colleague. Like that's the story you want people to tell. And it's figuring out what channels to tell those stories. Newsletters, blog posts, articles, intranet, website, annual report, like tell the stories, tell it from the mountaintop, and that will inspire people and call them to action.
Mm-hmm. Love that, man. Because when people think about data-driven DEI, they're not probably thinking stories. Right? But you know, it's the data is only one piece of it, right? It's how you tell the story around what the data says, right? Which is going to be remembered. So I'm seeing a lot of I want to jump in sort of to the data piece because I'm seeing a lot of companies. I'm seeing a couple of new startups that are launching right now, specifically focused on DEI data. I'm seeing most companies are using their existing tech that they have in place and kind of using it for DEI along with the data from their pulse surveys as well, but it's not maybe made for it specifically. They're kind of having to like, you know, make it work, as to say, with what they already have. Like, is there a specific platforms, you know, when you talk about data-driven DEI, what is the best way to measure success? What does good look like?
Yeah, I'm seeing a growing cadre of what I call integrated DEI platforms. I think about Dandy as one example. I think that's been on your radar. I think about Canaries with a K, Matheson, Globe Smart, Open Sesame, Blueprint Strategy Platform, Included.ai, Mesh Diversity, and M-Prising. Like there's a growing list of platforms, which I reference in the book. I also see a growing cadre of integrated learning platforms like M-Train and Raleigh and others. So I think it is as much due diligence as we've talked about to the DEI journey, you want to apply that same due diligence to these platforms because there's pros and cons across the board. And HR professionals know this from their journeys with HRIS systems.
Yeah.
So, I mean, like there are a plethora that are available now. And there's pros and cons for what's the right fit for you. Before we started taping, you mentioned kind of the maturity of the DEI field. And of course, HR is more mature. We're now in the maturity curve of DEI and platforms are on that same curve. So I say to listeners, you know, do your homework on the platforms and figure out what is the best marriage with your IT infrastructure, your HR infrastructure, and your cultural infrastructure.
Yeah. What are some of the questions you think they should be asking when considering whether they're investing in a DEI platform, a DEI analytics platform?
Yeah, I think you have to ask how comprehensive is the data collection engine? Meaning, because data collection and data reporting are brother and sister. I cannot report if I do not collect. So the collection piece has to be able to collect comprehensive demographics. You know, in the DI world, we talk about intersectionality. In the data world, we talk about cross tabulations. When I'm running cross tabs, I'm actually running intersectionality analysis. Can I run the analysis for gender and race? Can I run it on sexual identity and location? You know, like all these cross sections are getting at intersectionality. And if I can't get to that, I can't get to deeper insights. There's a book whose name I love. It's called The End of Average. Because if you can't disaggregate, you end up with averages. What's the experience for everyone? What's the inclusivity score for everyone? And I obscure the deeper underlying realities of Latina women, LGBTQ men. The list goes on. So look hard at what data does this engine collect, because at the end of the day, it's going to restrict or enable what you can report.
Yeah, love that. And also you got to look at, like, is there bias in it in the software itself?
Yeah.
Because
Right.
if this software was coded and built by a bunch of white males, then maybe there's bias built in, if that makes any sense.
Makes sense. Yep.
As well. Listen, I could talk to you forever, man. I feel like I've got to let you go at some point. There's so much more for everyone to get into in the book. But if there's one, what's the one thing you want people to walk away from when they read that book?
Yeah, the one thing I hope people walk away from is a fuller appreciation for their personal journey. I just did a session with leaders at a Fortune 500 on data-driven DEI, and I asked them, what's the benefit to you of more diverse relationships, more inclusive behaviors, and more equitable practices? And the first response I got, Chris, from a DEI professional was, it will help our organization to be more inclusive. Now, I need you to listen to that. That's not the answer I was looking for, because they framed it in the benefit of the organization. I said, no.
Themselves. Yeah.
Exactly. I said, what's the benefit for you? I want you to be selfish. Like what? Like literally. And the answer is a plethora of answers. It will get you better compensation, more advancement, better health, better wellness, more expanded opportunities. Like there is a personal case for DEI, which I don't think we've told, because we focus on the business case for DEI. But I hope people take away is the importance of their personal journey. I don't care what your organization says. What do you say about why it matters to you?
Yeah, it's for everyone listening right now, write your answer in the comments section. I'm going to post this clip on LinkedIn. Mark, you're listening right now. We're going to post this as a clip, but we're going to ask that question on LinkedIn. Let's see what responses we get, because it's very rare that we are asked that question. What does it mean for Chris?
Mm-hmm.
And I guarantee you, most people were like, "Wow, I never even thought about it that way." So because that's who we're doing it for. Every single individual. Right. As well. So such a great way to end. Where can people learn more about you, grab a copy of the book? Where's the best place to grab you?
Yeah, folks can go to Data-Driven DEI. I'm so glad it was available. Data-Driven.com, and they can learn more about me, learn about the book. You can also go to Randal Pinkett with 1L.com for my personal website, and go to BCT Partners.com to learn more about the work we do at BCT.
Amazing. And for everyone listening, all those links are already in the chat or the description. Wherever you are, whatever platform you're listening, the links will be there as well. And also make sure you go and connect with Randal over on LinkedIn and follow him there. But man, it's such a pleasure. I appreciate it. I love what you're doing. I'm so excited to get the book into the hands of our audience and everyone, not just the HR leaders, like we said earlier. This is for everyone out there. And I think that's an important distinction. People always ask me, Chris, why do you have all different guests around all these things? I'm like, because it's for everyone. It's called the HR Leaders Podcast, but everyone should be responsible for DEI, for culture, for inclusion, we all play a part and have an impact. So I appreciate everything you do, man. And I wish you all the best. Until next week, I need to come over to your house and listen to some tunes. I feel like I'm looking at the rack and I'm like, all right, it'll be a good night. It'll be a good night of listening. But I wish you all the best until we next speak.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you and your voice. Blessings.